The views and reflections shared in this podcast are personal interpretations and are intended to inspire reflection and exploration. They don't represent official positions or universal truths, but are offered as one perspective among many. Welcome to Mystican Identity, the podcast that invites you to discover unity in every tradition. I'm Phoenix Kevalin, and in each episode we explore the timeless wisdom woven through mystic teachings, religions, and spiritual philosophies, all leading us to a deeper connection with one another. Today, we'll be diving into Chapter 3 of the Perennial philosophy, Personality, Sanctity, Divine Incarnation, a journey into the heart of shared spiritual beauty and the universal truths that bind us. So have you ever considered how the words we use shape our understanding of concepts? So today, I'm going to explore this question through the lens of the Perennial philosophy, revealing how language impacts our spiritual perceptions. Aldous Huxley gives an example. For example, in English, words of Latin origin often carry a sense of intellectual, moral, ascetic classiness, different from what's present in Anglo-Saxon counterparts. For example, maternal sounds far more refined than motherly, and intoxicated more cultured than drunk. Shakespeare's choice of character names like Sir Toby Belch instead of Cavalier Tobias Eructation humorously highlights this comparative. But what about deeper concepts like personality? Let's consider how the Greek language, with its focus on being and essence, contrasts with Hebrew, where action and doing are emphasized. This difference shapes theological discussions in the Christian tradition, influencing how divine actions are perceived and described. In the New Testament, written in Greek, the word logos is often interpreted as the Word, such as in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, representing divine wisdom or principle, or even Christ. Contrast this with the Hebrew concept of davar, which means word, thing, or action, emphasizing practical, actionable aspects of spirituality in texts like the Torah. In Sanskrit, words like Atman or Brahman reflect a layered understanding of existence and the universe, suggesting an interconnectedness that defies simple translation into English. The concept of dharma in Sanskrit intricately combines duties, rights, laws, conduct, and virtues to represent a way of living that is in accordance with the cosmic law. This contrasts with the English word duty, which typically refers only to a moral or legal obligation. The Japanese term kami illustrates a spiritual presence in all things, a concept that challenges Western notions of divinity as separate from the mundane world. Let's consider kami, which are often loosely translated as gods or spirits in English. However, in Japanese culture, kami can be elements of the landscape, forces of nature, as well as beings and qualities that possess spiritual essence, like trees or waterfalls, showing a more animistic aspect than the Western separation of material and divine. Arabic's nafs, often translated as soul, encompasses a range of meanings from ego to life essence, offering insights into the spiritual journey within Islamic philosophy. The term nafs, at its simplest level, means self, but in spiritual context, it can refer to the ego or base desires that need to be purified. In Sufi spirituality, transforming the nafs from its lowest state, nafs amara, or the commanding self, to a purified state, nafs mutmana, or the tranquil self, illustrates the journey of spiritual evolution. So those are just a few illustrations. So we can highlight, back to personality, if we replaced personality with its Anglo-Saxon equivalent, selfness, which carries starkly different connotations, would we still hold it in the same high regard? Selfness, devoid of the Latin-derived classiness, might make us reconsider the reverence we afford to individual identity. The perennial philosophy teaches us that this emphasis on a separate self is a barrier to understanding the divine. And in my own personal experience, I'd have to agree. In many cultures, overcoming the notion of selfness is key to spiritual enlightenment. Consider the allegory of the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve's decision to eat from the tree of knowledge represents the original act of asserting selfness. Choosing the knowledge of good and evil over the unity with the divine, so therefore causing separation from divine unity. And this story is not just a cornerstone of Christian theology, but echoes a fundamental theme across many spiritual traditions: the peril of self-consciousness and the fall into dualistic thinking. In the context of the perennial philosophy, this allegory underscores that elevation of personality, our cultivated self-image and ego, is akin to this original sin. Our spiritual texts and mystics continually remind us that returning to a state of unity with the divine, or dying to self, is the path to enlightenment. So, if we were to replace personality with selfness in our everyday language, wouldn't we become a little more cautious about worshiping the self? Could this shift in terminology help us grasp the spiritual necessity of transcending our individual egos? So I'm hoping that with these small examples that we kind of explored, language not only describes our world, but shapes how we engage with it in a spiritual sense. The words we choose and the languages we speak play crucial roles in how we understand and connect with the divine. This practice has actually encouraged me to analyze how I use words and which words I pick. And there are many times where I do feel like, as in mid-sentence, I'll think this one is a little bit more powerful, or this one really encapsulates the feeling or emotion behind what I'm trying to say. It's changed a lot with the way that I communicate. And it also has shaped the way that I perceive things on a spiritual level. So, having explored the linguistic foundations of our spiritual perceptions, let's dive deeper into how these perceptions play out in real spiritual practice. Huxley gives an example from this mystical classic called The Cloud of Unknowing, which challenges us to transcend our mental limitations and connect with the divine in a more profound way. And some background before we dive into that is that The Cloud of Unknowing is a 14th century text that teaches us to transcend the limits of our minds and connect with the divine. This book, written by an anonymous English monk, encourages a form of meditation that reaches beyond intellect to experience God, or the divine, or the beloved. The central theme of The Cloud of Unknowing is that God cannot be grasped by intellect alone. Instead, the author guides us to seek God through a cloud of forgetting, where all cognitive efforts are relinquished. The unknowing part it's not about ignorance, but it's about recognizing the limitations of our mental faculties in comprehending the divine. Or I guess I could put it just, the classic kind of line is unlearning what we have learned, so to speak. So in this pursuit, the text emphasizes the role of a profound inner sorrow. Ooh, heavy. And the sorrow is born from heavy awareness of our separation from God. This isn't ordinary sadness, but a transformative agony that arises when one fully realizes that their own existence is distinct from the divine unity. And here's a passage that illustrates this concept. All men have matter of sorrow, but most specially he feeleth matter of sorrow that knoweth and feeleth that he is. All other sorrows, in comparison to this, be but, as it were, game to earnest. For he may make sorrow earnestly that knoweth and feeleth not only what he is, but that he is. Did you get all that? Okay, so this sorrow is described as necessary for cleansing the soul, not just from sin, but from attachments or clinginess to self that obscure our divine interaction, influence. It prepares the soul to receive the joy of God, which strips away all awareness of self and immerses the soul in divine presence. The author advises that embracing this sorrow is essential, as it leads to a spiritual rebirth where the self is transcended and God's presence is felt directly. The author uses the phrase stinking lump to refer to our selfness or ego. It's the sense of self that is considered separate from God, that duality portion. And this term is used to describe the ego in a very negative light, emphasizing its obstructive nature in the path to spiritual union with God. The author portrays this self-awareness as something foul and unwanted, a barrier that must be actively despised and forsaken if one is to become a perfect seeker and reach the divine through a state of unknowing. And here's where wording and our language comes in from the start. And this strong language, this stinking lump, is meant to highlight the radical shift away from self-centeredness required to achieve a true mystical union where all personal thoughts and desires are surrendered in favor of a complete focus on the beloved. And I'd have to say the phrase stinking lump metaphor, I think that vividly expresses the need to cleanse one's spiritual self of the ego's contamination, to see God in purity of spirit, so to speak. And this aligns with the broader theme in mysticism and in the perennial philosophy of moving beyond the individual self to experience a profound connection with our beloved. And this approach aligns beautifully with the teachings of the perennial philosophy, which also speaks to the need to transcend the self to experience the beloved, just as Huxley describes the barriers erected by our personalities. The Cloud of Unknowing presents the self's knowledge as the ultimate barrier to spiritual enlightenment. This discussion about the transformative sorrow of the Cloud of Unknowing brings me back to a really important moment in my own spiritual journey, and it's something that happened to me right after my near-death experience. I'd have to say that it's the point where it kick-started my awakening. And it was a realization, and this realization fundamentally changed how I viewed my relationship with the divine, and also where I really started to adopt more saying, my beloved. So, little bit of backstory. I grew up in a Christian environment, and it just that with the teachings, I just felt that they were more, how would I put it? Felt more legalistic or political, a lot of memorization of texts and words and verses and things like that. But not a lot of experience or feeling, which made things really confusing for me because the teaching was I was supposed to have this personal relationship with God, but I didn't feel anything personal or relationshipy. It all felt word-based and memorization and jargon. So really, it wasn't until my awakening that I understood the nature of my spiritual separation from divine unity. And what it was that I came to realize that the separation wasn't something imposed on me, such that I was a victim of ending up in a scenario like everyone else, and like it was thrust upon me. And now I was stuck with this situation that I had to get out of. And when I realized that really what it was many, many lifetimes ago, it was my choice, a result of my own defiance. The story of Adam and Eve, or the allegory of the Garden of Eden, isn't just about two individuals. It's about a choice that anything that left the divine unity participated in, and that would include me. So that separation is a result of my own ego, my own pride, my own arrogance, my own defiance. And it just, as I realized it, I just realized the ugliness of those types of characteristics. Just to reiterate, it was realizing that in some distant past, I had decided to turn away from unity with the divine in a moment of sheer arrogance, like gall. And I was overwhelmed. And honestly, when I realized this, I wept. I wept like I have never, ever wept before. It just automatically came out of me. Uncontrollable. It was this pride that had led me away from the unity that I longed for. And this just wasn't sorrow. It was deep, like very deep. And I understood this cleansing grief that the Cloud of Unknowing speaks of, because in that sorrow, it burned away a lot of stuff from me. It burned away even the mystery of things. It burned away arrogance. And it started me to realize just how free I finally felt. I felt, I guess the best way I could describe it is like I could breathe fully for the first time. Very, very strange, but very, very relieving. And I guess the best way I could visually communicate it is that I realized at that moment after I wept that it was as if I had been swimming against the currents all this time, and I had finally worn out, come to rest. I was moving with the currents, and I could move without much effort. And I guess that's when the seeking journey began. So, very much like the monk who wrote The Cloud of Unknowing, I learned that the path to God doesn't come from intellectual understanding. I mean, that helps, doesn't hurt anything, and it's very, very beneficial a lot of times. But experience also from the heart's deepest yearnings and sometimes from its deepest sorrows give that experience, which for me became the foreground of my relationship with the beloved, and all of the wording and the legalistic, politically kind of feeling kind of stuff is the background. And I don't know, maybe just consider this in your own reflective or meditative practices. Like, how might the cultivation of this deep, transformative sorrow move you closer to the spiritual realities that lie beyond the intellect? Like, how does this letting go of self-knowledge lead us closer to the true knowledge of the divine, as proposed by mystics across ages? I don't know. I try not to tell people what to do, but it's something to reflect on, and if it benefits you, great. If not, like I said, we're all on different sides of the mountain. So please find a method that works very, very well for you to reach the divine. So we often hear about the need to overcome our selfness to truly connect with the beloved. But what exactly is this selfness that spiritual traditions warn us about? Aldous Huxley, in his exploration of the perennial philosophy, digs deep into this question, invoking the ideas of David Hume. Quote, "What is the nature of this stinking lump, or selfness, or personality, which has to be so passionately repented of and so completely died to, before there can be any true knowing of God in purity of spirit?" David Hume was a Scottish philosopher, and he described mankind as nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with a inconceivable rapidity and are in perpetual flux and movement. Whoo! Yeah, all that. And this idea challenges the notion of a stable, consistent self. So let's just break that apart, because that was a lot of stuff. So like Hume's perspective suggests that we consider our self, our personality or ego, is merely a temporary combination of parts, of experiences and perceptions, constantly changing and fundamentally without a permanent essence. And this contrasts with Buddhist philosophy. Just as Hume denies a permanent self, Buddhism teaches the doctrine of anatta, or non-self, which also refutes the existence of a permanent soul behind our experiences. And with another quote from Huxley, an almost identical answer is given by the Buddhists, whose doctrine of anatta closely corresponding to Hume's bundles. Huxley, however, probes deeper, questioning how these bundles or perceptions come together. Is there a unifying force behind them, or are they merely random accumulations? Quote, did their constituent atoms of experience come together of their own accord? And if so, why? Or by what means? And within what kind of non-spatial universe? So, while Hume and Buddhists see the self as impermanent and ever-changing, Orthodox Hinduism and much of European thought from Aristotle onwards argue for the existence of a soul that organizes and utilizes these experiences to form a unique personality. To quote Huxley, to give a plausible answer to these questions in terms of anatta is so difficult that we are forced to abandon the doctrine in favor of the notion that, behind the flux and within the bundles, there exists some kind of permanent soul. So this philosophical inquiry into the nature of self is not just academic. It directly impacts how we approach spiritual practices aimed at transcending the self to achieve union with the divine. And as we consider these views, how might they affect our understanding of what it means to die to self and live to spirit, as urged by the exponents of the perennial philosophy? So having explored the transient and often deceptive nature of selfness as detailed by Huxley and reflected in the philosophies of Hume and Buddhism, we now turn to a question that beckons us toward transformation. What lies beyond this stinking lump? How do we cultivate the seeds of divinity within us? Very good questions. What could begin to deny self if there were not something in man different from self? William Law. Law's query about what in man is different from self introduces the concept of a higher, spiritual aspect within us which is capable of transcending the egoic self. What is man? An angel, an animal, a void, a world, a nothing surrounded by God, indignant of God, capable of God, filled with God, if it so desires. Barul. Barul offers a profound and layered reflection on the human condition that is rich with theological and existential implications. And what Barul captures here is the essential dualism in human nature, part divine, an angel, and part earthly, an animal. This duality reflects the Christian and broader spiritual perspective that humans occupy a unique place in creation, embodying both heavenly aspirations and earthly desires, describing man as a void, a world, a nothing, speaks to existential themes of emptiness and the quest for meaning. It suggests that without a connection to something greater, i.e., God, the beloved, humans might experience a profound sense of emptiness or lack of purpose. The phrase surrounded by God, indignant of God, and capable of God illustrates a complex relationship between man and the divine. It suggests that while humans are utterly dependent on God, indignant of God, they are also perpetually in the presence of God, or surrounded by God, and have the inherent potential to realize a divine nature, capable of God. Cool. And then the final part, filled with God, if it so desires, indicates that the realization of this potential is contingent upon human desire and choice. It suggests or theorizes that humans can be filled with divine essence if they choose to pursue this path, emphasizing the role of human will in spiritual transformation. The separate creaturely life as opposed to life in union with God is only a life of various appetites, hungers, and wants and cannot possibly be anything else. God himself cannot make a creature to be in itself or in its own nature anything else but a state of emptiness. The highest life that is natural and creaturely can go no higher than this. It can only be a bare capacity for goodness, and cannot possibly be a good and happy life but by the life of God dwelling in and in union with it. And this is the twofold life that, of all necessity, must be united in every good and perfect and happy creature. William Law. Here, Law discusses the necessity of divine influence for true goodness and happiness, suggesting that understanding our emptiness can lead to seeking fulfillment in the beloved. In Eckhart's Dual Nature of Man, he says, "The scriptures say of human beings that there is an outward man and along with him an inner man. To the outward man belong those things that depend on the soul, but are connected with the flesh and are blended with it, and the cooperative functions of the several members, such as the eye, the ear, the tongue, the hand, and so on. The scripture speaks of all this as the old man, the earthy man, the outward person, the enemy, the servant. Within us is the other person, the inner man, whom the scripture calls the new man, the heavenly man, the young person, the friend, the aristocrat." And that's from Eckhart. Eckhart's description of this inner and outer man provides a framework for understanding the transformative path from the old, earthy self to the new, spiritual self. Eckhart also is quoted again in Huxley's Perennial philosophy, stating that the seed of God is in us. Given an intelligent and hardworking farmer, it will thrive and grow up to God, whose seed it is. And accordingly, its fruits will be God nature. Pear seeds grow into pear trees, nut seeds into nut trees, and God seed into God. And I like Eckhart's metaphor of the divine seed. It just really helps put things into perspective, and I feel like it encapsulates the potential for growth into God nature, emphasizing the active role we must take in nurturing the growth. So wow, that's a lot of spiritual meat, and I'm getting the meat sweats. I'm getting the spiritual meat sweats. We've explored the nature of selfness and the possibility of transcending it. So now, let's dive into how Huxley expands this discussion to a broader canvas of human free will and the choices it presents us in defining our identities. Huxley posits that our will is free, and this freedom allows us to choose our identity alignment, whether with our lower self and earthly desires, with the divine spirit within and without, or obviously fluctuating between the two. A little mix of both. And I can't help, it just comes to mind when I'm going over this. It just reminds me, and I believe it was Sonny and Cher that sang, "I'm a little bit country, I'm a little bit rock and roll." I don't know, it just comes to mind. But yet we have ourselves another Trinity. Coincidence? I think not. So on the one side, identifying exclusively with our selfness can lead to spiritual damnation or a morally corrupt life. Now, I'm not necessarily a fan of this exploration, and the reason being is because I grew up with this desolation-style teaching and the fear that which really didn't do anything for me at all. It certainly made God as love concept really hard to grasp. Conversely, aligning ourselves entirely with the divine essence within us can elevate us to sainthood. And this would be the alignment of gurus and such. I can't even imagine being that enlightened. I'm just in awe of it. And these are souls that I didn't get this from Huxley, but I personally refer to as having Christ consciousness. But most often, we find ourselves in between, occasionally aligning with the divine, but frequently falling back into that ego-driven choices, which makes us, well, Huxley describes as average citizens. And this is where I would place me, full of ambition for the spiritual side, and then during the day, you've fallen back, stumbling and having to pick myself up and just brush myself off and continue along the path. Now, according to Huxley, true fulfillment can only be found through unitive knowledge of God, transcending the myriad temporary pleasures and identifications that distract us. And he vividly illustrates the complex and often contradictory ways people define themselves, combining diverse, even conflicting interests and fears into a single, multifaceted personality. Quote, with the pleasures of gluttony, for example, or intemperance or sensuality, with money, power, or fame, with our family, regarded as a possession or actually an extension and projection of our own selfness, with our goods, our chattels, our hobbies, our collections, with our artistic or scientific talents, with some favorite branch of knowledge, some fascinating special subject, with our professions, our political parties, our churches, with our pains and illnesses, with our memories of success or misfortune, our hopes, fears, schemes for the future, and finally, with the eternal reality within which and by which all the rest has its being. And we are free, of course, to identify ourselves with more than just one of these things simultaneously or in succession. Hence, the quite astonishingly improbable combination of traits making up a complex personality. Thus, a man can be at once the craftiest of politicians and the dupe of his own verbiage, can have a passion for brandy and money and an equal passion for the poetry of George Meredith, for horse racing and detective stories and the good of his country, the whole accompanied by a sneaking fear of hellfire, a hatred of Spinoza, and an unblemished record for Sunday church going. Woo! That was a mouthful. And so, from that, Huxley does have a bridge, and it's, while we may be tempted to conform to certain identities or desires, Huxley reminds us that we're not bound by these. Resistance is possible and transformation can be achieved. So let's explore a real-world example that Aldous Huxley shares in his discussions of human behavior under extreme stress. And it's a story that reveals not just how people react in moments of crisis, but how these moments can strip away the superficial layers of personality and reveal a deeper, more unified human essence. During a particularly harrowing mission in World War II, a young psychiatrist observed the crew of a severely damaged B-17 bomber. And despite their different personalities and backgrounds, the crew members responded with remarkable uniformity when faced with imminent disaster. All the crew members, regardless of their wounds or specific roles, functioned with precise decision-making, unwavering focus, and unselfish concern for the safety of the entire crew. Their usual personal preferences vanished, replaced by a collective goal-oriented action. And for time, I didn't read the actual story. If you want to read it, just there's a free version online of the Perennial philosophy, or you can pick up your own copy, and the full story is there. I just Cole's notes it just for time's sake. But in the story, Huxley points out that the crisis seemed to lift each man from his individual personality. Traits that normally defined them disappeared, overtaken by a need to act for the common good. And this uniform response to extreme stress illustrates a potential within all of us to transcend our stinking lump of selfness when circumstances demand it. And this story isn't just about survival in war. It's more of a metaphor for our spiritual battles, kind of like the Bhagavad Gita. Just as these men transcended their personal limitations, we too can rise above our everyday selves in moments of spiritual crisis or decision. So let's use our understanding of these extraordinary responses to enhance our approach to personal challenges and spiritual growth. I think that by training ourselves in the little things, we can prepare to rise above our base selves, just as the crew of that B-17 did. So like I said earlier, all that stuff has given me the spiritual meat sweats. It's a lot of stuff, and I'm actually breaking down this chapter into individual portions because I think to condense it all in one episode would just be a little thick. So as we conclude today's exploration into the nature of selfness, identity, and transformation under crisis, we've journeyed a lot through some profound insights from the stinking lump of selfness that Aldous Huxley describes to the remarkable uniformity in human action during extreme crises. We've seen that beneath our diverse personalities lies a deeper unity of purpose and potential. In the stories of combat crews acting with singular determination, in the philosophical debates about identity by Hume and the spiritual teachings of Berulle, we recognize a consistent theme. Our true essence emerges most clearly when we are tested, and these moments of crisis don't just challenge us, they reveal us. They strip away the superficial layers that we often mistake for our true selves and remind us of our capacity to rise above them. And this capacity isn't limited to moments of danger or overwhelming challenge. It's present in our everyday choices and actions. Each day, we have the freedom to choose how we define ourselves. We can succumb to easier paths, aligning with the desires and fears that often direct our lives, or we can aspire to something greater, something more aligned with the divine essence that resides within each of us already. And I find that there's a message of hope here that is clear and uplifting, that no matter our past choices or current circumstances, the potential for spiritual transformation is inherent within all of us. It's never too late to grow. It's never too late to choose to live more fully, more consciously, and, more aligned with our higher selves. So, as I move forward, I'm going to consider the roles that I play and the identities that I embrace. Like, are they bringing me closer to the person I truly want to be? Are they helping me connect with the divine? How does this reflect with you? And one thing that I have to remind myself of and not beat myself up over is to remember that the journey of transformation is ongoing. It really is. And each step, each choice is a part of a larger, beautiful process of becoming and unbecoming at the same time. So thank you for joining me on this exploration of Mystican Identity, where we uncover the unity within every tradition. And I hope today's journey inspired a sense of connection with the shared tapestry of spiritual wisdom. And as we reflect on these insights, please remember what unites us at our core. And if today's episode resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and share it with others on a similar path. So join me next time as we continue to uncover the wisdom that binds us all. And I wish you and your loved ones all the best. Have yourselves a wonderful experience. Bye-bye. Music by Devere Silver.